Right time to have a look at the papers. And to join me to gander over what's making the covers of the newspapers is, well, where do we start? Author, diversity consultant, you name it. Vernal Scott, good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Where should we start? Daily Telegraph has got some cracking stories on, plenty of them to keep us going for a little while. Where would you like to start?
Well, you know, with the election, the UK election over and done with, one of the principal concerns for the new Prime Minister, or the elected Prime Minister, David Cameron, is Europe and whether the UK is going to stay or leave. And there's always been lots of infighting in his party about, you know, being pro-Europe, European or not. And so his main agenda then is to prepare the country for what's going to be a referendum as to whether we stay in Europe or leave.
But it's not going to be the current where we stand now. There's going to be these big discussions over the next few months, probably a year, with all the rest of Europe, and then that is what is going to be put to the British people.
Yes, but the essence of it is still going to be whether we stay or go. And but in the background, whilst you know Mr. Cameron is bouncing balls in the air regarding his relationship with the rest of Europe, he's also having to do the same within his own party. And in the background, France and Germany have made moves to make it clear that their intention is to get Europe to stay together, and you know whatever the UK might want to do. And adding to the mix is Tony Blair, the former Prime Minister of the United Kingdom,
who keeps cropping up.
Keeps popping up, but I think for good reason, because his role is to try and persuade us to stay in Europe. And personally, I think he's right. You know, I think this small island attitude is going to die out, frankly. I think we need to be part of Europe for business purposes, but also because we are part of a European family.
It's interesting that most of the businesses that are effectively pro-Tory, pro-Conservative, are also the ones that are saying you really need to consider pulling out. Airbus has suggested that it would have issues. Deutsche Bank are doing the maths on whether they would say HSBC doing a similar thing, perhaps for different reasons. But surely if you've got a sort of a business positive party running the country, they're going to be pro-Europe themselves.
Well, thankfully, it will be a decision for the people, and I think that you know politicians and businesses see life through you know a tunnel, and I think the British people have got a sense of Europe. And they frequently visit other parts of Europe, and I can't see us going back somehow. Everybody I speak to is very pro-European. So.
Not least for the holidays. Another front cover story there. Road and jet noise fueling obesity epidemic. Have we got a new thing we can blame obesity on?
Well, thank you, James. That's exactly my feeling about it. You know, you've kind of stolen my thunder there. Yeah, you know, people need to be much more conscientious about their food intake and exercise. You know, the essence of this story is that people who live in the hub of the city, you know, places like the West End, which is Tottenham Court Road, Oxford Street, etc., seem to be fatter. And
they don't have to walk it very far because everything's really close to them in Tottenham Court Road.
There's that,
surely.
and some people might say, well, there are fewer parks and places to sort of go out and jog, but you know, it doesn't entirely add up. It's not exactly cogent because there are lots of slim people who live there too.
That they've ignored in this study.
Absolutely, and the reason, you know, is simply about personal habits, and I think that, you know, occasionally stories like this come up, but if you look through them, you'll realise that they actually don't make sense.
What about jet noise? I mean, are they suggesting that if you live under Heathrow's flight path for takeoffs and landings, that all of a sudden going to sort of pork up?
Well, you know, they're saying that it's adding to the stress of people, all the noise and all the chaos, and that people like that comfort eat and you know, and all of that business, and sleep less and are stressed more.
I'm not so sure.
So
knowing that we've got jets overhead somehow reminds me I'm actually in London, and when I lived in Johannesburg, it did the same there.
Right.
Anyway, another little story on the front cover. We'll do this briefly. The Pope hasn't watched telly for years.
Very briefly. I did come across somebody else recently who doesn't own a TV, And he deliberately does not want to see the world going by on a small screen. He wants to get out and experience it.
Which is a noble
It's good, and the Pope does travel a bit. Certainly before he got his job. You know, when he was in his previous guise, he did travel
to see lots and lots of people, surely. Thousands of them at a time.
He does, and you know, life goes on. Yeah, there's always the radio.
But how does he, I was going to say, well, how does he keep up with his beloved football teams? Because obviously he was well known for his love of
Apparently he
football.
doesn't bother to do it on screen, so I'd imagine it's by radio, James.
Right, let's move on from the Telegraph. Where do you fancy going now?
I did have a story about, which I'm coming to, has to do with the Last Supper, which is in the Daily Mail.
You and I have had this chat before.
We did.
What's happened with this?
Well, it's just another example of you know, somebody who is terminally ill being proactive about their departure from this world. He had a Last Supper, hence the headline, with his family.
You can see who he was amongst that Last Supper grouping.
Yes, and it was a very beautiful, you know, goodbye. It was organised. It wasn't, you know, he decided he didn't want to be a vegetable, and that he wanted, because he has a tumour, I should explain, and that it would have killed him at some point. It would have made him immobile, paralysed. He decided he didn't want to live that way.
At any point.
At any point, it could have kicked in, and he would have just been unable to take the decision that he's already now taken to actually end his life.
And it was done described as the least worst option. And is that something that a lot of people describe this as? That the whole idea of seeing their body falling apart is one that they really cannot deal with?
Well, I think, you know, I don't want to sort of confuse, you know, disability, for example. I mean, there are lots of disabled people who live, you know, active, productive lives, who contribute just like anybody else, and who, in my view, are very underestimated. This gentleman was terminally ill. And he decided to be proactive and not allow his imminent demise to take control. He was going to take control of it, and it was organised, and it's happened, and the family were on this journey with him.
A couple of things he said. I'm going before my time, but I'm not scared. The tumour could stabilise, but I cannot take that chance. He said, I want to have the ability to have a cup of tea and hold a phone. I want to be able to do those things myself. And he thinks that he's doing the best long-term for his family.
Yes.
But it's bound to sort of reignite the discussion over whether we have assisted suicide in the UK. And, of course, it's also cropped up recently in South Africa.
Yes.
Sowetan next.
Yes.
The headline is staggering.
Yes.
But there is a bit of a backstory to this.
Yes, it's a bizarre story of a crash facility and the principal of coming across two children aged 2 and 5 who are engaged in some sort of sexual activity. Now,
which is bad enough in its own way, but what happens next is even more staggering.
Yes, but and the truth is, you know, children do things like that. You know, they do act out what they see their
Doctors
parents
and nurses
doing. It's always happened, you know. But in this case, the principal decided to get these 2 young children to reenact what they were caught doing, and she videoed it. In her view, to show the parents, look what your children are doing in our facility.
And in fairness, she did that in front of other teachers, but surely somebody went, why are we doing this?
Well, apparently that's not what happened. The people who were in the room during the reenactment weren't the ones who complained. It was the parents who she sent the video to, who then reported it to the police. You know, hang on, why are you, you know, causing this thing to be reenacted and videoing it? So they've complained, and she's now in court, and in my view, quite rightly, under threat of some kind of sentence, because in my view, that judgment is beyond belief. You know, to get young children who don't actually understand what they're doing anyway, to do something that adults understand shouldn't be happening, and to video it and send it to the parents, of course they are going to be upset.
Is there any sense that the original activity, should we describe it as, was pre-planned or anything, or was it kids just sort of discovering their body? Because clearly these were very young kids.
Yes. I mean, they are described as having, you know, engaged in this activity in a toilet, but they are 2 and 5. You know, if they're older, then maybe, you know, we would have...
And the boy was the younger one, so it's...
Yes, you know, and you know, well, I mean, girls can be, you know, proactive
Dominant,
around
sure.
sex, you know, but, I mean, sex wasn't on their minds. They were just copying what they'd seen.
Yeah.
And I think that the principal behaved badly, and she's right to being caught over it.
She's going to be... she just recommended the boy and girl needed to be taken for counselling. I suspect she needed a bit of counselling on how to handle these situations too. Got a little bit more time. Should we have a look at the Cape Times? The little mention on the front cover about yesterday's Africa Day, a day to acknowledge the progress that Africa's been making. Yes, Africa's been making a lot of progress, but there's a lot of progress yet to be made, surely.
Yes, it's a mixed bag, really, when we look at Africa. If we look at South Africa, it's come a long way. But if you look at, and also if you look at Nigeria, it's extremely successful economically. But then you've got, you know, Cameroon, you've got Boko Haram, and that chaos that is still unfolding. But if you look at it holistically, there is a sense of a journey that's increasingly successful for Africa as a continent. And that's what people need to remember. Africa is a continent. It's not a country. You know, there are different countries within it. So if you look at it as a continent, then progress is being made.
This was all against the background of the xenophobic attacks recently. And there were a couple of mentions of the interdependence that these African countries had. Its Gauteng province in South Africa gets 90% of its water from Lesotho. What would we do if Lesotho closed its taps? We're dependent on Mozambique for gas, on Nigeria and Angola for oil. Like you mentioned, a bunch of countries, they are a whole continent, but they need each other.
Of course, you know, and you know, countries in the world need other countries. You know, what your natural minerals might be locally won't supply everything that you need. So you need to have a relationship with the world. And I think that that's a good story, that they're acknowledging progress and also hopefully saying to themselves, there's further progress yet to be made.
Vernal Scott, always good to have you on This Day Live.
Thank
for
you.
your view of the papers. Thank you very much.